For 15 years, Captain Dmitri Kozlov had been taking tourists out on fishing charters from Marina Bay. Families loved his patience with kids who couldn't cast properly, businessmen appreciated his knowledge of the best fishing spots, and everyone trusted his weathered hands to navigate the coastal waters safely. He was just the quiet boat captain who smelled like saltwater and diesel fuel, always ready with a fishing story and a thermos of coffee. Until the day drug smugglers chose his waters for their operation, and everyone discovered that Dex wasn't just an expert at finding fish. He was a retired Coast Guard intelligence specialist who had spent 20 years hunting the most dangerous criminals on the high seas. Welcome to True Human Tales. Before we continue this powerful story of hidden expertise, maritime justice, and a captain who never really left his post, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who protect our waters in ways we never see. Marina Bay stretched along Florida's Gulf Coast like a postcard come to life. Weathered docks, bobbing boats, and the eternal dance of pelicans diving for fish created the kind of scene that made city folks dream of simpler lives. At Slip 47 sat the Anastasia's Dream, a 42-foot charter boat that had seen better decades but still cut through the water like she was born to it. Captain Dmitri Kozlov had owned her for 15 years, ever since he'd arrived in Marina Bay with nothing but a Coast Guard pension and a deep need to stay close to the water. At 52, Dex was exactly what tourists expected from a seasoned fishing captain, weathered face that told stories of countless sunrises on the Gulf, hands scarred from decades of working with ropes and hooks, and eyes the color of deep water that seemed to see everything without ever judging. "Morning, Captain Dex," called Priya Patel, a regular customer who brought her family down from Tampa every month. "Kids are excited about today's trip." "Morning, Mrs. Patel," Dex replied in his gravelly voice, traces of his Russian immigrant parents still coloring certain words. "Conditions are perfect. Water's calm, fish are hungry. Your little ones picked a good day." Dex had a rare gift for making people feel genuinely safe on the water. He moved around his boat with the fluid confidence of someone who understood currents, weather patterns, and the temperament of the Gulf better than most people understood their own neighborhoods. Passengers instinctively relaxed in his presence, trusting that this quietly competent captain would bring them home safely with coolers full of fish and stories worth telling for years. What they didn't know was that Dex's intimate knowledge of these waters went far deeper than fishing spots and weather patterns. Before he became Marina Bay's most trusted charter captain, Senior Chief Petty Officer Dmitri Kozlov had spent 20 grueling years with Coast Guard intelligence, specializing in maritime drug interdiction and human trafficking prevention. He knew every smuggling route, every hidden cove, and every sophisticated trick criminals used to move contraband through America's coastal waters. Dex had retired quietly at 47, completely burned out from 2 decades of relentlessly hunting monsters who used the ocean as their personal highway. The fishing charter business had been pure therapy, helping families create joyful memories instead of destroying criminal networks, teaching excited kids to cast lines instead of planning complex tactical operations. For 15 peaceful years, the Gulf had been his sanctuary, and Dex had convinced himself that his warrior days were permanently over. But the ocean has a long memory, and some storms take years to reach shore. It started with small, seemingly insignificant things that most people wouldn't notice or think twice about. Boats running without proper lights after midnight, unusual radio chatter on obscure frequencies that legitimate fishermen didn't use, strange debris washing up on remote beaches that didn't belong to any registered vessels in the area. Dex noticed these anomalies because 20 years of intensive Coast Guard training had taught him to read the water like an open book, every page telling its own story. Every small anomaly meant something significant. Every pattern told a larger story. And the story slowly emerging in his beloved waters was one he'd seen too many times before in other regions, the systematic establishment of a criminal maritime network. 3 weeks ago, he'd spotted a high-performance cigarette boat moving fast through the commercial shipping lanes at 2 a.m. No running lights, no transponder signal, carefully following routes that deliberately avoided known Coast Guard patrol patterns. 2 weeks ago, a family on his charter had found waterproof packages washed up on a remote sandbar. Packages that Dex quietly retrieved and turned over to local authorities without mentioning his growing suspicions to his paying passengers. Last week, the disturbing pattern became crystal clear. While taking the Henderson family out for their special anniversary fishing trip, Dex had observed systematic surveillance of Marina Bay's boat traffic. Unmarked vessels strategically positioned to monitor Coast Guard movements, shore-based spotters with high-powered binoculars scanning the horizon, communication patterns that spoke to professional coordination and advanced planning. Someone was preparing for a major criminal operation in his peaceful waters. "Captain Dex," asked 12-year-old Bobby Henderson with the curiosity that only children possess, "why are those boats just sitting out there doing nothing? They're not fishing like us." Dex followed Bobby's pointing finger to 3 suspicious vessels positioned in a perfect triangular formation about 2 miles offshore. To casual observers and weekend boaters, they looked like recreational boats simply taking a leisurely break from fishing. To Dex's highly trained and experienced eye, they were establishing professional overwatch positions for something much bigger and more dangerous. "Probably just enjoying the beautiful weather, son," Dex replied calmly, his voice betraying none of the tactical analysis running through his mind, while mentally cataloging precise vessel descriptions, crew counts, and tactical positioning patterns. Sometimes people like to just sit on the peaceful water and think about life. But Dex was thinking too, thinking hard about patterns he recognized from his intelligence days. And what he was thinking made him reach for a secure radio frequency he hadn't used in 15 long years. That evening, as the sun painted Marina Bay in shades of gold and orange, Dex made a call he'd hoped never to make again. The encrypted number connected him directly to Coast Guard Intelligence District 8, where a familiar voice he recognized immediately answered on the second ring. "Commander Rebecca Torres speaking." "Torres, it's Dex Kozlov. I need to report unusual maritime activity in Sector Tampa." There was a pause. Commander Torres had been Dex's protege 20 years ago, a young intelligence analyst who'd learned to read smuggling patterns under his guidance. Now she ran the entire regional intelligence operation. "Dex? Jesus, where have you been? We've been trying to reach retired personnel about increased cartel activity in the Gulf." "I've been fishing," Dex said simply, "but I think the fish I'm seeing aren't the kind people want to catch." Over the next hour, Dex provided tactical intelligence that confirmed the Coast Guard's worst fears. A major drug trafficking organization had established sophisticated operations throughout the Gulf Coast, using routes and methods that suggested inside knowledge of law enforcement patterns. "Dex, we need you back," Torres said finally. "This operation is bigger than anything we've seen. They're moving military-grade equipment, not just drugs, and they know our standard interdiction procedures too well." "I'm retired, Torres. I take families fishing now." "Your waters, your call, but Dex, these aren't small-time smugglers. They're cartel operators with military training. If they've chosen Marina Bay as part of their network, civilians are at risk." Dex looked out at the Gulf, where lights from boats dotted the horizon like stars. Somewhere out there, among the legitimate fishermen and pleasure craft, predators were preparing to use his sanctuary as their highway. He made a decision that would end his peaceful retirement permanently. 3 days later, everything changed. Dex was taking the Nakamura family out for their vacation fishing trip when his worst fears materialized on the horizon. 5 high-speed vessels approached Marina Bay in formation. Not Coast Guard, not local law enforcement, but something that made Dex's blood run cold. "Folks, we're going to head back to shore," Dex announced calmly, his voice betraying none of the tactical assessment running through his mind. "Weather's looking uncertain." The Nakamuras protested. The morning was perfect, sunny, and calm. But something in Dex's tone made them comply without argument. 15 years of guiding fishing charters had taught him to project authority when safety was concerned. As Dex turned the Anastasia's Dream toward shore, his worst suspicions were confirmed. The approaching vessels were intercepting legitimate boat traffic, conducting what appeared to be enforcement actions. But these weren't law enforcement officers. They were cartel operators establishing control over a section of American coastal waters. Dex activated a concealed emergency beacon that hadn't been used since his Coast Guard days. Within minutes, his encrypted radio crackled with a familiar voice. "Dex, this is Torres. We're tracking multiple high-speed contacts in your area. What's your status? 5 hostile vessels establishing maritime control, Dex reported in the crisp language of military intelligence. Civilian boat traffic being interdicted. This isn't smuggling, it's territorial occupation. Coast Guard cutter Bernard is en route, ETA 22 minutes. Can you maintain observation? Dex looked at the Nakamura family. Father, mother, 2 teenagers who had trusted him to keep them safe on what was supposed to be a fun fishing trip. He could run for shore, deliver them safely, and let the Coast Guard handle the situation. Instead, he made the choice that revealed why he'd never really stopped being a Coast Guard intelligence operator. Torres, I'm going to need you to coordinate with local law enforcement for civilian evacuation. These waters are about to become a combat zone. What happened next demonstrated why Coast Guard intelligence specialists are among the most effective maritime warriors in the world. Dex didn't engage the cartel vessels directly. That would have put civilian lives at risk. Instead, he did what he'd been trained to do for 20 years. He turned the ocean itself into his weapon. Using knowledge gained from 2 decades of hunting criminals in these same waters, Dex began a running intelligence operation that provided real-time tactical coordination for the responding Coast Guard units. His fishing boat became a command and control platform, feeding critical information to approaching federal forces. 5 vessels, professional coordination, military-grade equipment, Dex reported while maneuvering the Anastasia's Dream through shallow waters that larger vessels couldn't navigate. Primary vessel appears to be command and control. Recommend isolation and systematic interdiction. The Nakamura family watched in amazement as their quiet fishing captain transformed into something they'd never imagined. Dex's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding tactical operations. His movements showed the precision of military training, and his knowledge of these waters revealed depths they'd never suspected. Captain Dex, asked 16-year-old Kenji Nakamura, who are you really? Dex's answer came while he coordinated with Coast Guard cutters approaching from 3 directions, turning what should have been a cartel takeover into a carefully orchestrated law enforcement operation. Son, I spent 20 years making sure American waters stayed American. Today, I'm just making sure you get to go home and tell your friends about the fish that got away. The operation lasted exactly 18 minutes. When it was over, 5 cartel vessels were seized, 15 suspects were in custody, and the largest drug interdiction in Gulf Coast history had been completed without a single civilian casualty. The Nakamura family's fishing trip had become front-page news, but more importantly, they had witnessed something extraordinary. A quiet professional who had never stopped protecting the waters he loved, even 15 years after he'd officially retired from the fight. The media coverage focused on the dramatic elements. Fishing captain reveals Coast Guard past, major drug bust, retired intelligence officer saves tourists. But the real story was quieter and more profound. Dex had spent 15 years believing he'd left his warrior life behind, that he'd successfully transformed from someone who hunted criminals into someone who helped families create happy memories. What he learned that day was that the 2 roles weren't opposites. They were the same mission expressed in different ways. Will you go back to the Coast Guard? Asked Mrs. Nakamura as they finally returned to Marina Bay, hours later than planned, but with a story none of them would ever forget. No, ma'am, Dex replied, securing the Anastasia's Dream to her berth with the same careful attention he'd always shown. This is where I belong. These are my waters. These are my people. The uniform doesn't matter. The mission never changed. The Coast Guard offered Dex a return to active duty with a promotion in command of the entire regional intelligence operation. He declined, but accepted a new role as maritime intelligence liaison, officially remaining a civilian fishing captain while unofficially providing the kind of local knowledge that only comes from spending every day on the water. Marina Bay returned to its peaceful rhythm, but with a difference. The fishing captain at Slip 47 was no longer just a retired Coast Guard officer. He was a guardian who had proven that some people never really retire from protecting others. Dex continued his fishing charter business, but with enhanced purpose. His passengers still caught fish, still enjoyed peaceful days on the Gulf, and still trusted their quiet captain to bring them home safely. They just didn't know that their fishing guide was also part of an intelligence network that kept criminal organizations from using their vacation waters as smuggling highways. The Nakamura family became regular customers, and Kenji eventually joined the Coast Guard himself, inspired by the day he learned that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear fishing gear and smell like diesel fuel. 3 months after the cartel interdiction, the Coast Guard installed a small plaque at Marina Bay, in appreciation of those who guard our waters in every capacity. Dex never acknowledged it directly, but he'd nod approvingly when tourists asked about it. More importantly, Dex's story spread through maritime communities along the Gulf Coast. It became a teaching example in Coast Guard intelligence training, how retired personnel could continue serving their communities, how local knowledge was often more valuable than satellite surveillance, and how the most effective guardians were often those who blended seamlessly into the communities they protected. Dex proved that service takes many forms. Some people protect American waters by patrolling in cutters, others by analyzing intelligence in offices, and still others by taking families fishing while quietly watching for threats that most people never see. The ocean remembers everything. Every storm, every calm, every ship that passes through its waters. Captain Dmitri Kozlov understood that his job wasn't just to help people catch fish. It was to make sure the waters remained safe for fishing, for families, and for the kind of peaceful moments that make life worth protecting. Captain Dex still takes fishing charters out of Marina Bay. He still has the weathered hands, the patient demeanor, and the thermos of coffee that tourists expect from their fishing guide. But now his passengers know they're in the hands of someone who doesn't just understand the water. He understands the responsibility that comes with protecting it. The Gulf remains peaceful. Families still create memories on weekend fishing trips, and kids still get excited about catching their first fish. The difference is that now everyone knows their safety isn't just protected by distant Coast Guard vessels. It's guarded by the quiet captain who knows these waters better than anyone else and who never really stops standing watch. This story was brought to you by True Human Tales. Have you ever encountered someone whose quiet expertise suggested hidden depths? Tell us about them in the comments below and let us know what city you're watching from today. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to support the channel. We honor the guardians who continue teaching one lesson at a time.